Steve Bannon, welcome.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. Happy birthday and congratulations on the building the network. It's really amazing what you're doing.
Well, that's because I've got the Steve Bannon Show on my network. That's why we're growing, Steve, because it's the hottest thing out there. Another meltdown coming today. I want to get to that. But first, the president's speech yesterday and the Democratic response, which I really thought was disgusting. I just don't understand why these people can't just come together and why they're weaponizing this virus. I thought Pelosi's response yesterday was downright embarrassing. But Steve Bannon's take, what is it?
Well, look, that speech last night was about reassuring the American people about action and reassuring the world's capital markets so that we stop this kind of economic and financial crisis on top of it. And it obviously didn't work. Overnight, we've had a real meltdown in foreign markets, starting in Japan with the Nikkei, the oil market, the European market off, I think, 7%. And now let's say the Dow futures, the Dow Open could be open over 1,000 points down. Maybe I think it's right now 1,200 points. I mean, today or tomorrow, we may be at the point that the market's at 23,000. If we open the day to 1,200 points down, and it looks like there's no bottom, this could be complete capitulation. You could get back to, theoretically, tomorrow, 19,000, where the president started on November 9th of 2019. Mm-hmm. That's just a reality. The global capital markets want to see a kind of a coordinated response of the G7. In other words, Europe putting up $1 trillion of stimulus with the United States matching it and having some sort of central bank coordination. And they didn't get it last night. And so I think today the president, a couple of things I think have to happen. I do believe it's imperative that he call a national emergency. That's a technical term that will trigger a bunch of activity and also funding. I think in that national emergency, he's got to focus on two things immediately. Number one is massive testing. This is all about testing, getting the test kits out, using these commercial operations. If we have to get the Korean test, we have to find out how many people have the virus here, how the disease is here. We have to find out how many people have it. Number two, I would very much focus on there's 1 million hospital beds in the country, 100,000 of those are ICU units. We know from the nations that have had problems, China and now particularly Italy, which is in a full meltdown, that it's the ICU units that are the gating event. The president in this national emergency, I think, should focus having National Institute of Health and others look to create at least a 20,000-bed surge capacity for people. Number three, obviously, is more shutdowns of these units of gatherings so that we can end up being more like Korea than Italy in this situation. That's on the national side. Then the international side, I think the Secretary of Treasury with the president has to have Mnuchin call a G7 finance minister meeting in Washington on Friday to work through a G7 coordinated response on fiscal stimulus. I think the central bank, Chairman Powell has to call all the central bankers together for a coordinated response of the central banks to support the financial system. And I think the president has to embrace Nancy Pelosi. She's put forward a bill. It's obviously not perfect, but it looks like it's fully baked. Has to embrace, McConnell, Pelosi should come to the White House today. Mm-hmm. And I think work with the president to try to get this bill passed and out there to give some undergirding to the American economy and to the world financial system. And the last thing I think the president ought to do is ought to call Ben Bernanke and have Ben Bernanke come to the White House and talk to him about how he handled the 2008 financial crisis. I mean, this is a highly complicated situation. You have a global pandemic with a major economic crisis about supply chain. On top of that, now I believe, and the bankers didn't say it yesterday, that we don't have a financial crisis, but I might want to point out that the banker who said that, his stock is off 40% in the last 2 months. So the markets are saying that they're not confident or not highly confident in Citicorp, right? So I think that we're exacerbating this problem. I think we need to take immediate action in order to turn it around.
Okay, so CNN is just putting out now that the president's speech yesterday created chaos, that his speech was the reason why everything is collapsing today. Explain that.
Well, I don't listen. Look, as you know, John, you've been to the border with me. I chair a private foundation trying to build border wall, which you've been down and done broadcasts from
Yes.
I'm the first guy to say, hey, if we need to close the borders for certain things, we need to do it. It is important that we need to monitor, dramatically traffic coming in from Europe. We also need to seal off Italy. As Italy sealed itself off, that's very important. But last night's speech, and the president actually mentioned cargo, which means cutting off trade. Right now, we don't want Europe to go into a recession. If Europe goes into a recession, it pulls us down with them. We need to have a coordinated response between the Europeans, ourselves, and Japan and Korea. It needs to be coordinated. And right now, we need to work with people. So just shutting down air travel, don't get me wrong, it's important, but it's not the top thing. We have many more items we have to deal with, including declaring a national emergency here and really getting on with this testing, which we have to do, and also about these hospital beds in the ICU units. So those
Why is it testing so critical when the research is showing that 50% of the people that have it don't even know they have it, and it just goes away in 3 weeks? Why is the testing now so critical?
Because you have to look at Italy. You see the exponential rate that this thing catches on. You have to find out how many people actually have it so they don't infect other people. Mm-hmm. Right? Once you have people, even if they're asymptomatic, if they have it, you can put it. They can go to self quarantine.
Right.
They can start to do social separation themselves. So this thing, remember, this thing spreads right now either 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 for every person that has it. That's if you just look at the chart. Remember, you've listened to War Room Pandemic. 2 weeks ago, I had Maria Luisa, Rossi Cummings on January 31st or February 1st. There were 2 cases in Italy. 2 days later, there were 4 cases in Italy. This is why we've had Dave Ramaswamy on talking about the exponential function, exponential growth. That's where you're seeing in Italy. In Italy now, you're seeing an entire nation that's quarantined themselves, and quite frankly, you're seeing the collapse of the public health service in northern Italy. And they're having to triage. And what triage means, because of the lack of ICU units, what they have to do is make determinations because of your age or health. How much care did you actually have? That they really take care of the younger and the healthier versus the older and the infirm. In the United States, we do not want to be forced into those decisions. Mm-hmm. That means you have to get ahead of it. You have to understand how much of the population is actually sick. Mm-hmm. And knowing that, you can have people do self-quarantine, or you can start to actually quarantine areas, right? What you don't want to have happen is have these hot zones like in northern Italy, or like in Qom, Iran, or like in Seattle, Washington. You don't want those to develop around the country. And so that's why it's absolutely essential that we test, just so we understand how much of the disease is here.
Steve, have you had a direct conversation with President Trump on what you're recommending he should do?
No, I don't want to talk about what conversations I have, but I've talked to a lot of people. So, and I think you're going to start to see, particularly on some of the coordinated response. I think that he's got the right team in place. Pence and these guys are doing, I think, a good job. You just got to, just double down and go on this. I do think that the issue of not roiling the markets by calling a national emergency, that horse has kind of left the barn. I mean, mm-hmm. Right now, the implied open of the Dow Jones Industrial is going to be now 1,200 points. Mm-hmm. We could be below 20,000 by mid-afternoon or today. Mm-hmm. So the world equity markets they vote, right? This is not Steve Bannon talking. This is the world's capital markets,
right?
Are saying that the direction you gave last night they don't want to buy it. They're dumping it, right? So I think you got to recalibrate, and part of that is you don't anything that would send Europe into recession will drag us into a recession also. And so that's why it's got to be this coordinated response between the G7 countries. And that's why I think it's incumbent to have some sort of meeting of the finance ministers immediately and talk about the stimulus. I think we have to articulate more. Nancy Pelosi put out a fully baked bill last night. Mm-hmm. And she's going to vote on that bill, I think, this afternoon. Mm-hmm. So it's not to politicize it too much. I do think, although I do understand why the president, since she did impeach him, he's got a lot of concerns about working with her. Can he trust her? I think right now you got to put those things aside and embrace people and try to work through this. Or the capital markets are going to force. Look, you either take action where you're driving the action, or you're going to be forced into action. Mm-hmm. And right now, what happens when these markets start to melt down like this, mm-hmm. you start to have these triggering events, and then therefore, hedge funds have to start selling these stocks. You start hitting certain financial tripwires that all of a sudden the computers and the artificial intelligence are just telling the fiduciaries that, hey, this stuff's got to be unloaded. And so therefore it starts to get away from you, and then you can't control the action. Right now you still have the ability to control the action. Carnival is up. I'm watching the CNBC. Carnival just announced they've halted trading. They're going to announce some news. So you're going to start seeing companies do this. Mm-hmm. And I just think if you want to get ahead of the action, you have to get ahead of it.
Stephen K. Bannon with us. War Room 2029 at 10 a.m. War Room Pandemic 11 a.m. He's on 10 to noon on Dish Network. He's on video, the Dish Network channel 219 if you have that. Also on the John Fredericks Radio Network and other independent stations and Salem Radio. Steve, let's get to the meeting yesterday at the White House. All the bankers came. Wall Street came. Bank of America, Wachovia, they all came. And they were telling a very different story. They were telling the president, calm, liquidity is fine. It's not like the 2008 crisis. Everything is fine. I mean, that was the message that came out of the White House directly from some of the bankers. What changed in 12 hours?
Well, number one, when the bankers say that, remember, bank stocks are off 40% since January. So, look, are the banks better capitalized in 2008? Yes, they are. Are the banks, because of the testing, we put in better shape? Theoretically, yes. So we don't have, it's not 2008, we don't really have a financial crisis per se, but you can drive it in there by having this economic crisis on top of the pandemic. That's what you have to worry about.
Right.
And, and yes, and what you're trying to do here, that's what the pandemic. Remember, the most powerful thing President Trump is, I think, is that nothing is inevitable. This is taking action.
Right. So the president,
you don't imperil the banking system.
Right. So what about trade? I mean, the president yesterday banning travel to Europe for 30 days. That makes sense. Some people have interpreted that as we're not trading with them. What's that about?
Was a comment. Well, this is the president clarified it afterwards by tweet, but in the speech itself, he said we're stopping cargo. And I think that's why people said, well, cargo's trade. Are we stopping trade for 30 days? The president clarified that immediately afterwards with a tweet and saying that I don't think he specifically was talking about cargo. One of the issues is obviously this virus, stays on surfaces, I think, for a week or some technicality like that. But the president did clear it up that it wasn't about cargo. I think initially there was some, concern that was actually in the speech where he actually said that. That got cleared up afterwards. But that's what people are talking about, that they're not trying to stop trade. That's what today, I think, if you reemphasize that would be very powerful.
So, Steve, the main thing is that you're saying is the horse is out of the barn. Forget trying to calm the markets. It's over. So what you're suggesting is the president declare a full national emergency today.
Yeah, I think by taking more bold action. Look, President Trump's a man of action.
Right.
I think by taking more bold action, declaring a national emergency, you're not going to roll the markets more. In fact, you're going to calm the markets because you're going to realize you're taking bold action on testing. You're taking bold action on trying to solve the issue about care, which is, I think, principally about, at least now, ICU units and healthcare workers, and also about social separation, which the leagues themselves, everybody's doing this. And why are they doing it? They're doing it because of liability. The universities are shutting down. The leagues are stopping because these boards of directors are afraid of being sued by people that go there and catch the disease and later come back and saying, you knew that this disease was out and you still had this huge gathering and I'm going to sue you. So it's the liability. It's the liabilities. That's why people are stopping. It's happening anyway. Just get ahead of it and do bold action. If you do that, it's going to calm the markets. I mean, the president's had a great run. And the reason he's had a great run is the markets and hedge funds and investors throughout the world understand the president's a businessman. He understands risk. He's done a tremendous job of building this economy. The economy was on fire before this pandemic hit. And all you need is continue on bold action. That bold action will start to calm the markets. I also think a coordinated response between Europe and the United States is essential, particularly on stimulus. We don't want Europe to go into a recession. Right? And to do that, you need the Germans to step up. And so that's where you got to have some sort of coordinated response. And I think this response has to be massive. I don't think we can have some theoretical discussion right now about Keynesian economics. We're in a crisis, and I think you need a massive response to show that we're going to push our way through here.
And Steve, in your mind, that massive response would be in the form of a dramatic economic stimulus package from
Yeah,
various G7
I think it
governments.
both tax. I think it'd be the payroll tax cut the president talked about.
Right.
That's when he went to Capitol Hill on I think it was Monday, Tuesday afternoon to have lunch.
Hmm.
And he'd mentioned last night the payroll tax cut. There's many other things. I think you can have the Fed about how you get money to small businesses. Maybe something even more aggressive than the small business loans. Things about using unemployment insurance, right, for these small. Remember all these basketball games that are being stopped. You know this from Richmond. Look at the. You're not going to have no fans at the ACC tournament, no fans at the Big East tournament. Well, all the vendors, all those people are affected. You got to figure out how to solve for that, and it can be done. I mean, it's they have the team that can do this. You just got to get on with it. And I think in that, the markets will calm down, and then you buy yourself some time to get some things fixed. But what you don't want to have is these markets in an uproar because of that. And I think the president has been people that are investors globally have thought the president's done a great job. That's where the American economy's kind of led this global recovery. Hey, John, I got a bolt because I've got.
All right, Steve Bannon, I really appreciate you
Yeah.
coming on. I know you've got a lot to do here. Stephen K. Bannon, thanks for being with
Well,
us.
thank you. And by the way, John, thank you so much for producing the show. Really appreciate it. And everybody should listen to War Room Pandemic every day. We try to go through, as we have since January, the issues facing this. Today we're going to focus on, obviously, the global financial part. Really, Italy. People should really focus on what's happened in Italy. Their lack of taking dramatic action early on has led to really a catastrophe there. And so we'll get more into that today also.
All right, hottest show in the United States. Steve Bannon, War Room Pandemic, 11 a.m. to noon, right here on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Steve, thanks for making time for us today. We'll be right back.